Welcome to Back from the Abyss. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. Well, we've reached the end of season 3, and I'm sitting across from my main man, my co-conspirator, my podcast, passion project dude, Chris Johnson.
Hello.
Yeah, good to be here.
Good to be here.
And this is Fishbowl. And for those of you who don't know what Fishbowl is, a brief history lesson. When I was at Brown in residency, when we learned group therapy, we would take a break halfway through the group therapy session, and the group therapist would go in the middle of the circle. All the patients would move outside, and then we would have an in-depth discussion about what was happening with the patients, what they were talking about, what they weren't, what they were avoiding, what dynamics were happening. And it was sort of a way for the group members to see the inner workings of our therapeutic musings. So this is Fishbowl. This is Chris and I going over season 3 and all things Back from the Abyss. And I think this Fishbowl is going to be a little more intense because I'll talk about this in a few minutes. Last week, Chris and I were having a very intense, interesting, passionate discussion about the Saj episode, the last episode. And if you haven't listened to the Saj episode, turn this off right now and listen, because it's a must listen. First of all, it's super interesting, and this Fishbowl will be infinitely more interesting if you listen. Basic structure today is that Chris and I are going to talk about the listener poll, some very interesting things we learned from you listeners. Thank you all of you who participated. And we're going to also mention some of the best listener ideas for season 4. And there were so many. Wow, I think 3.5 single-space pages of ideas from listeners. Chris and I are going to talk a little bit more about what we'd like to see in season 4. We're going to make special chef sampler recommendations. Now that we've published 69 episodes, we're going to each give our special chef's suggestion, because, hey, it looks like we have a lot of new listeners. And for you new listeners, we want to point out maybe some older episodes that are real oldies but goodies that you might like. And then we will talk about Saj and that episode and all the issues that came up. But first, let's talk about the poll. In short, the listeners, at least everyone who responded, 2/3 women.
Hey, Craig, How many people did respond?
We had 148 people respond.
Cool.
Yeah, which is really cool. And so of the 148 people who responded, 2/3 are women, 30% are in our age group, 50-59. Yeah. The next most popular age group was 40 to 49. Most popular occupation, almost 15% of listeners are master's level therapists. We had people from almost every state answer. The most common, the most responses came from Colorado, with California in second. 22 countries we had people respond. How did people find Back from the Abyss? Most people, the most common one was they heard me on another podcast. So I hope that was on one of the podcasts where I sounded reasonable and coherent. Not like one of the early ones, like 3 years ago, where I was so nervous I sounded like I was on meth. Yeah.
You should be on more podcasts.
I should be on more podcasts. And then, this was really interesting in response to what describes why you best listen to Back from the Abyss. The most common response, 61%, I have or have had my own mental health issues. And then the second most popular was 51% of you said, I'm interested in psychedelics. And I'm not going to go through all these, but there were 136 responses to what do you get from listening to Back from the Abyss. And these were so kind and awesome. And people said really beautiful things about the music and the structure and the editing and the subjects and the openness and the vulnerability. And this is such a really a thank you card. And I look at this list sometimes and it makes me so happy.
Yeah. I just have to say, it's incredibly rewarding to get this kind of feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All but one of you love Chris's music. And one person said, the music is harsh.
Yeah. Early on, I suppose it depends on what episode you listen to.
Yeah. I think in season 1, but this is fun. I was Venmoing Chris the other day and I sent him some money, and the reason was for harsh music.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And then this was really, this was almost as heartwarming as anything that people said. what is your favorite Back from the Abyss episode? So we put out almost 70 episodes, and I think 46 of them got mentioned as a favorite. And that was so amazing. And even I think 4 of you put Fishbowl as one of your favorites.
Yay.
Yay.
I like the Fishbowl episodes.
I know, I like the Fishbowl. So, and hopefully this will be the best Fishbowl yet. So that was really interesting. And then another issue that brought up was a lot of people love the psychedelic episodes. Those were probably some of the most mentioned. But some of the least listened to, least downloaded episodes are my mini episodes where I just pontificate on something. And those actually got some love too. And I got emails about that. So I was really happy to see that we're doing different kinds of things, and some listeners are responding to each type.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's good. Mm-hmm. As a generalist, I appreciate that.
Yeah. But something deep was revealed, Chris.
Well, you didn't mention the gender. What was the most popular gender?
It's 2/3 women.
2/3 women. So let me just get this straight. Mm-hmm. The age was 50 to 59.
That was the most common age group, yes.
The most common gender was female. Mm-hmm. The most common or place where people are is Colorado. Mm-hmm. And occupation, master's level therapist, maybe?
Yes, almost 15% of listeners.
So, Craig, we thought we were going to go out and do our own little project for the good of the world, but really it sounds like we're doing it for our wives. As they are in that exact demographic, aren't they?
That would be true. Rachel, your wife, Elizabeth, my wife, are 50 to 59 women in Colorado, master's level therapists. So really, this is our unconscious acting. All these hundreds and hundreds of hours was not actually to put something beautiful out into the world. It was to try to reach out to our spouses.
What do you know?
I don't know if it's working.
I don't know if it's working either. I hope it is.
I don't know, because my wife has said, I think you're having an affair with the podcast. But now I should say, no, I'm actually having an affair with you through the podcast.
There you go.
This is an act of love.
And we have data to back it up.
Oh, man, that's great. So we had, again, pages of ideas of season 4 topics, and this was amazing. And not only would people list topics, but oftentimes long explanations of why these topics were personally meaningful, or even giving us ideas on how we would approach them. Thank you, all you who put that. But Chris, why don't you start? What were some of your favorite listener ideas for season 4?
Well, I'm going to admit right off the bat that I picked topics based on producing the show, what would be good for the show in terms of topics that are current and important in the time and place that we are, and also because they're of interest personally to me. So I'll just put that up there. I thought that something on abortion would be interesting and timely. I thought that the suggestion of talking about misdiagnosis and commonly seen mistakes would be interesting for especially the professional therapists that listen. Autism is a topic that I'm interested in. Schizophrenia deep dive, especially as it relates to adult onset and family issues and how to get treatment for older folks. Anxiety has been one that I've been interested in for a while. Grief, I think, is a pretty universal topic. And I really like the idea of talking about MDMA in couples work.
I like that too. Is that it?
One that I didn't know about, we were talking about before we went on, started recording here, is psychosomatic dermatology.
I like that.
And so for people like me who didn't know what it means, can you sort of expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, this is the idea that the skin is deeply tied in with the psyche and our mental emotional well-being. So there's lots of psychiatric syndromes, psychological syndromes that are at least partially expressed through the skin.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I like that one. Some of my favorites, well, at the top of the list, I wrote 4 that I want to do. I'll just say those. I want to do a mini episode deep dive on the nosology of suicidality, which is sort of like I did an episode how to think about depression, how to think about anxiety. I'm going to do one on how to think about suicidality, which actually may sound sort of grim and dark, but it actually, I think, is very interesting when you parse out all the different sort of strands that go into that kind of hopelessness. I'm also deeply interested in who develops PTSD and who doesn't. I'm going to do a mini episode on that. And then we've been getting lots of people who want me to talk more about ADD, ADHD, both differential diagnosis, how do you differentiate from anxiety and sleep issues, and also just treatment, because there's a lot of important issues around treatment. So those are things we're going to do. There were a lot of requests for psychedelic topics, and you and I have talked a lot about this, Chris, that the most popular episodes are psychedelic episodes. I'd say the majority of people who reach out to me to do stories want to do psychedelic stuff. I'm deeply interested in psychedelic stuff. But, this is not back from the abyss psychedelics and stories. This is psychiatry and stories. So I want to keep it broader. So here's some of the things that people suggested. I love these. So one was to have a teen and parent come on and talk about the issues between them. And I think I have a really great one lined up.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. I love MDMA couples work. I want to try to find someone. We've had a number of people ask about DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, and trying to do a deep dive on that. I've had a few people ask about IFS, internal family systems, which I'm very interested in. And also some people said, could we look at IFS in psychedelic work, which I think is also cool. A number of you wanted to know about burnout, especially with healthcare workers and therapists, because a lot of you are therapists. And I too have really struggled at times with burnout, and so I think I would like to bring on someone to talk about that. Some people have asked for another in-session recording, like I did with the Delta flight attendant. That was really stressful. Maybe I'll do one. I'm going to have to do, some real kind of Zen meditation if I'm going to do that again.
This shouldn't bring you more stress.
No, I don't. Yeah, right. Oh, I really want to do an episode on when a loved one refuses treatment. A few people have asked about that.
Yeah, I like that one too.
Yeah, and I like you, Chris. I really like the schizophrenia deep dive, misdiagnosis. This is a good one too. Someone suggested looking at imposter syndrome and mental illness. So many people feel undeserving of care because they're not ill enough, because other people are suffering enough, and that is such a common phenomenon. And depression and hormones. A number of people have asked me about that. So literally,
that's a good one too.
Like literally, that was 1/4 of the list. So
the reality is they're all fantastic suggestions. I again just pick the ones that I personally would like to hear you talk about or have our guests talk about. So if your suggestion wasn't mentioned, it's not because it's not a good idea.
It's also fun to look at the list because you and I had envisioned originally that this would just be stories. This would be like The Moth or This American Life meets Psychiatry. And then we started figuring out, like, maybe we should try some other things. So I did some of the mini episodes with just me talking. And then we started in season 2 having some experts on where I sit down with them. And that was fun.
Yeah.
So I really like that we do a little bit of everything, that we keep the stories kind of front and center. But it was fun to see these listener suggestions that they encompassed kind of all the different things that we're doing.
I agree.
Let's segue into, Chris, you and I sharing some chef sampler plates. I was just at this wonderful restaurant in Denver recently, and there were so many things on the menu. I just thought, I don't even know. And the couple we were with, they said, oh, let the chef pick. I thought that's a little scary. They said, oh, no, the chefs know. Because I would have just ordered the things I knew, like pad thai or something. But,
right.
So these various dishes came out, none of which I would have ever ordered on my own, and it was amazing. So, in the listener poll, we saw that 30% of the listeners have listened to all the episodes, which, again, I know there's selection bias there because the biggest fans, but I also saw that a lot of the listeners had only listened to a few, and looking at the download numbers over the last few weeks, we have a ton of new listeners. So I thought it'd be fun, Chris, you and I each came up with kind of a sampler plate if we were at the Back from the Abyss farm to table restaurant. People show up like, give me your best episodes, your most interesting, like what speaks to you. And I have no idea what you're going to say. And so
Right.
you prepared something that I did too.
Yeah, and we did it slightly differently, I think. I have maybe a house specials, what we're known for, as my primary sample platter, and then I also have a darker set of episodes for folks.
Do we have dark episodes?
I suppose it depends on your tolerance for things, for emotions and whatnot. But there are some that I think probably take a little more to listen to and require you, or it's probably good that you're in the right state of mind to listen to, just because they're heavy topics about important things.
Okay. So let's hear it.
Okay. So the house specials, I have one of my favorite episodes probably of all of them was done this season. It's Psychotherapy Twice Told. It's just a recent episode.
Love that.
The reason that I picked it is that I found it so amazing and beautiful to hear the relationship between the therapist and the client told from each of their own perspectives and how closely it aligned. So I liked the format of the story, and I loved the relationship that was revealed and what it meant to each of those participants in their own worlds.
Yeah. And you did such an amazing job editing that. That was a big, when I gave you the two recordings, I said, are you ready?
I did not pick it for that reason.
Yeah.
I listened to it with my wife on a road trip recently. I said, we should listen to this because I was really proud of the way it turned out. And also I thought it would mean a lot to her as a therapist to hear how much her work affects her clients also. So not that she doesn't know that, but to me, it's just, I love it, the reveal there. So that was the first one. The second one I picked was MDMA and the Inner Healer. I think that I liked this one because I thought the story was very compelling, and I just think the use and the potential benefits of MDMA and I love the studies that are going on, and the fact that it seems like there's some real good evidence that it's a medicine that's going to be a huge help for a lot of people that have suffered. So
I remember, Chris, when you did the music for that episode, I remember where I was standing when I listened to it, because I sent you the draft just without music, and it was in Winter Park. I was getting ready to go cross country skiing, and I listened to the music you added to that episode. Totally brought tears to my eyes, and I called you and said, "Oh my God, this is perfect!" Like the music.
I think it brought tears to my eyes. It's interesting. Just the weight of some of these stories and the courage it takes to tell them is, it's astounding, really, I think. And the third one I picked is an episode that we called When a Tree Falls Twice. And the reason I picked this episode was, again, it was a good story. I liked the way the story was told. But I also really liked the way that you were doing voiceovers during this period of time in the show. And we haven't been doing that as much. I think it's just a personal preference of mine. I enjoy the breaks and then having you come in and fill in some of the blanks as the story unfolds. To me, that's really compelling and interesting. So I thought I think that's an episode that's a good combination of your insight and a good story too.
Thank you.
So what about you?
Okay, I had 4 dishes.
4 dishes?
Yeah, 4 dishes. So I have an appetizer, 2 mains, and a dessert.
Oh.
And again, in the spirit of trying to pick 4 dishes, which maybe wouldn't be things that people would initially choose, but I thought were very special.
Okay.
The appetizer is an episode that I didn't know. I was actually very scared to release this, but it was almost everything about psych meds in under 16 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quick and dirty, but there's a lot of wisdom in there. And that's actually gotten a lot of love. And I've gotten a number of medical people that have reached out. But the reason I did it as an appetizer, it's not a story, but it's very me. And that I think one of my best strengths as a physician, as a thinker, is I'm a good synthesizer, and I'm able to quickly sort of sort out what's important, what's not.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good introduction to kind of how I think, not just me personally, but the podcast in general. The 2 main dishes are 2 of the heaviest episodes. They're true abyss episodes, but they just so moving to record both of them. There were lots of tears as I was recording them. The first one is Where Did Our Son Go? Yeah, it's Where Did Our Son Go? A Family Looks at Schizophrenia. That was from this season. And that was with the parents of a longtime patient of mine who I've been treating since he's in middle school. And that was, not only was it such a powerful thing to record, I think it was such a valuable thing I hope to put out into the world, because schizophrenia is common. It's like 0.8% of everyone has schizophrenia. So that's, almost 3 million people in the US have this devastating illness. And yeah, I was just super proud of that episode. And again, not easy to listen to, but I think it highlights some of our best work. The other main dish, I was very, very happy it was mentioned as one of the listener favorites, and that's the Doug Friedman episode from this season, the Aftermath of Suicide episode. And again, the download numbers aren't as high as on some other episodes this season, but if you haven't listened to that, you have to listen to it. I remember when you called me, Chris, and said it was done, and I listened to the edit. I was pacing around my backyard, just crying, listening to it. And I called you and I said, this is the most amazing episode. This will live on. This will outlive us, I think. So, and then for dessert, we have to lighten it up because those are 2 really heavy.
Right.
So I think we go all the way back a couple years to one of my personal favorite episodes, which is Adventures in Exposure Therapy, where I sit down with an OCD specialist, Dr. Amy Indermule, who's one of my favorite colleagues in Northern Colorado. And she's funny and smart and tells wacky stories. And she and I sort of do a nitty-gritty, what is it like to do exposure therapy with people? And
the cool part of that episode, that there was a first part of that also, where the client, the patient, was interviewed first, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first part was OCD in the time of Corona.
Yeah.
And then the second episode was Dr. Amy and I sort of deconstructing that woman's treatment and what happened.
Yeah. I really like that, the pair of those episodes.
Yeah, me too, thanks. And then you have another flight.
Well, mine is the heavier one that I mentioned, the one where I think you need to be in the right headspace. And one of them you touched on. I have Where Did Our Child Go on my list as well, because I think the same thing. In fact, and a lot of people probably who listen to this occasionally know that I shy away from sad things. Those aren't the movies that I pick or the books that I read, but I listened to that episode twice, aside from working on it. So I've listened to that episode more than twice, really. The other 2 on my list would be All We Have Is Now, which was the episode of the therapist who was suffering with her own health issues and how that played with her clients. I thought that was a fantastic and heart-warming, wrenching episode. And then I have Strawberries, our very first episode on the list, because I think that maybe for some sentimental reasons, I think the story was great. I think that it shows the origin of the show. We were still learning, so it's not one of my personal best in terms of the part that I play in all of this, but I think that it illustrates. It's another truly back from the abyss story. So I have that on my.
I know. I love that episode so much. Those are some really really great episodes. It was actually a fun exercise to go back and all the episodes and try to think about which ones, again, not of the best ones, but like, if someone said, hey, what's this podcast that you do?
Yeah, when we've kind of talked about you've talked about this before on the podcast, and I think the user survey speaks to it, is that we seem to have maybe 3 or 4 primary audiences. It's folks who are interested in abyss stories of mental health, psychedelics as they pertain to mental health. I maintain that we definitely have the professional therapist audience. And then I maintain that there's a educator or student body out there also that benefits from the podcast and listens to it with an ear towards their future work, maybe. Mm-hmm. Are there any episodes that you would recommend for either a student or perhaps a educator that would help in their work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've been thinking now for, last 2 or 3 years, like it just seems like we are in the age of anxiety. And I think you and I have talked about this. When I think back about being in high school and college in the 80s, I don't remember anyone having anxiety. I mean, I'm sure it was around, but I knew people with eating disorders, but anxiety, and there's a lot of reasons why. I think we are in the age of anxiety, and so many adolescents I see, and college kids and young adults and parents and teachers, but I really think particularly young people. It's just awful. It's an epidemic. And I do think one episode that we've done at least is really relevant, and that's how to think about anxiety from season 1. And what I tried to do in that is just to put anxiety into an easy to understand kind of metaphoric context, and then give some basic strategies about how to address it. So if you haven't listened to that, whether you're a young person or a teacher or maybe a parent who has a kid with significant anxiety, you should listen to it and maybe pass it on.
Great.
So let's transition to our main course.
All right.
Just a little intro. I think I alluded to this in the last 2 Fishbowls, but I think one of the things that makes this podcast so special is, it is a partnership. I mean, it's my baby, and that I'm the psychiatrist, and that I find the guests and I am driving the boat. But it's very important to know that my co-pilot, Chris, is an integral part of things.
Is opinionated.
Is very opinionated. Because I think it's very tempting, if you're running something, a company or a restaurant or podcast, it's very tempting to have someone who's working with you sort of validate you and shine upon you and just sort of blow happy smoke your way and more puppies and rainbows. And that's not what I need. And so from the very beginning, Chris, I've totally appreciated how incredibly, sometimes we'll say brutally honest. And I've asked for it. Like to your credit, you'll often say, and this has been true now all these 3 seasons, do you want to know what I think? Do you really want to know? I say, yes, I want to know it all. So I really appreciate your honesty, because so many of these episodes, both before and after, you and I have really long discussions. And I wanted to do our Fishbowl today on the Saj episode again that we just released. Mm-hmm. And again, stop right now if you haven't listened to the psychosomatic therapy episode with Saj. 1, because it's very interesting, and 2, because this following discussion will be much more interesting. But anyway, the context for this, a week ago after it released, you and I were on the phone.
Right.
And you said, hey, I got a lot of questions and thoughts on this last episode. And you started mentioning all sorts of really good questions and ponderings and musings. And I said, stop. I said, go to your computer, write those down. Let's do Fishbowl on this, because, in a lot of ways, this is such a perfect example of what I think you and I do before and after these episodes. There's all the work that we do producing them, but then we have a lot of back and forth of what about this and this, and you're often, very, very accurately, sometimes painfully pointing out things that maybe I don't want to hear, but they're almost always right on.
I would say, first of all, I couldn't do that to just anybody. I've gotten in trouble in previous points in my life for being brutally honest. It's a quality that has its pros and cons, and I appreciate you letting me voice my concerns. I will say that I think, to your credit, the things that I see or hear are because I'm not as close to the subject matter, and I think I can listen in a way that it doesn't really make sense for you to be listening. So I'll just say, I think that a lot of the things, and also it's because we both love stories and podcasts, and we're trying to go from being amateur podcasters to better podcasters or storytellers. So I think a lot of the discussions that we have are around, have we been honest with the story? Are we editing in a way that makes sense? Are we leaving things out? Are we, being as, I don't know, fair? Well, maybe fair is not the right word. Complete. Sometimes I think that we have to make decisions in order to take what's probably, well, I know for a fact, is a long, complex story that often occurs over many months and probably years, and condense it down to under an hour. And that's difficult probably for the pros also. So.
Okay. So why don't we launch into the psychosomatic therapy episode?
Okay.
Again, a little pre-context. We talked a lot about it in the making of it beforehand, and then this was all discussion that started happening after. And we do this with a lot of episodes too. What did we learn from it? What should we have done? Could we have done it better? Or oftentimes I think, you have the beginner's mind. You don't work in mental health, so you'll, before and after, you come up with lots of questions of things I wouldn't have necessarily thought of because, I'm so deep in it.
Well, we did start this conversation did start before it was published, because should we just jump right in?
Let's just jump right in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the way that we typically work, if anyone's interested, is you'll do your interviews, which are a huge amount of work on their own that take hours and weeks to prepare and then record, and then send me raw audio, and I turn it around and you make some edits and I make the cuts, and we go through that a couple times. And then when the story gets to a certain point, I usually divide it up and put in some breaks. In this case, I had gotten the audio that you and Saj did, and as I do these days is I put on my headphones and listen to the whole thing when I'm on a dog walk, so that I can just get an impression of the story right away. And in this story, I remember I came back, I got home from the walk, I probably had 15 minutes left of the episode, and I called because I found it fascinating, just incredibly interesting and powerful, and just like I was getting a glimpse that I would never get in any other way. But I said, okay, I have two questions for you. And they were, did Natasha have or Saj have prior knowledge to the trauma or the attack that was being discussed, or was it being revealed in real time, was the first question. And the second question was, and I've said that now, I haven't listened to the last 15 minutes, but did it help? Did Natasha, was she healed or find solace in the experience any relief in that because of the process that she and Saj went through? And you said, I don't know. I can follow up on those questions. Those are good questions, as you often do, which is fantastic. I'll ask a question and it's never like, that doesn't matter. You always are attentive to my questions. So I thought, okay, great. This is going to be good. But I also thought, and this is where sort of our discussion started to develop, was why didn't you think about those things during your time recording with Saj?
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's what just jumped out. Now, I think that that's just how we listen to things differently. And so you said you check, and you did check. And then before long, you got back to me with the answers to the questions, which you explain in the conclusion of the podcast. But as it turns out, there was no attack specifically. And I know that both of us were under the impression that there was an attack. That was the way that the podcast, the way that your conversation had progressed, was that both of you were under the impression that this was representing something very specific that had happened in Natasha's past. And when it was revealed that there wasn't, to me, I felt that we were misleading potentially the audience because that was omitted, that fact was omitted. And so I that's sort of where we started this conversation, right? And it brought up all kinds of interesting things from there on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that brings up so many interesting issues. So a little background. So when Saj and I first started talking about this, because Saj reached out to me and said, I have this amazing audio tape recording of a transference ketamine session during one of my therapist trainings. And he sent it to me and I listened to it and I thought, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And so, I admit the first thing I thought, this will make really good audio, really good audio. And I thought we'll be able to make something interesting and educational out of it. Mm-hmm. So, I think my initial thought wasn't even about the details of what she was describing. Just I thought, I can't believe we have this on audio. This is so good.
Right.
And then I think another thing that's gets lost somewhat in the recording. I mean, Saj does talk about this, I think, in the middle, but we're hearing a few minutes of a ketamine session that went on, I think, for 2 hours. We're hearing like 17 minutes of it. And Natasha was on day 4, I believe, of doing other kinds of work, mostly cannabis-assisted therapy, but I think she'd had one other ketamine session prior. And this is a training exercise, not necessarily a therapy exercise. So and then there was a lot of integration and discussion that happened afterwards. But again, I think, and this is what you were mentioning a few minutes ago about the complexities of, are we being honest? Are we telling stories in good faith? I think one of the challenges of this was, in my mind, we have this amazing audio and let's build something around it. But it was already, an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think it could have been 5 hours. And it's interesting. I had a very different reaction to you when I heard that it was a metaphoric reaction, not literal, that she had had a lot of abuse and terrorization by men, but nobody had actually ever tried to strangle her, at least that she could remember. She seemed Natasha seemed very okay with that. She's like, yeah, it came out as metaphor and we processed that in integration. And I didn't even think much about it. I thought, oh yeah, it was a metaphoric transference. And you pointed out that could be a lot of different things. Could it have been that she made that, her experience, what's kind of where you go back and you revise history, in her integration, she's going back to kind of come up with an explanation that would describe what she experienced while under the influence of ketamine. And at one point, I think you were kind of joking, but you said she was high on ketamine. Maybe Saj just looked really scary when she was high on ketamine.
So one of my concerns that came out of all this is I thought, because I didn't want to be overly critical. I checked myself and thought about this from a bunch of different ways to just make sure that I wasn't overreacting. But one of the topics that came up on this was, I haven't done psychedelics with therapy, but I have done psychedelics in my life. And I know for a fact that some of the physical effects of that are very similar to some of the things that Natasha was describing in her session. Her eyes were burning. She was sinking into the couch. It was hard to breathe. She went from cold to hot. Those are all things that if anyone has had experience with psychedelics has probably experienced at some point during that time. That's not to say that it wasn't something else, but to not acknowledge that, especially in light of the fact that the attacker was not. It was a metaphor at the end. I just felt like there was some loose ends that, and then I started to wonder: is Craig too close to Saj? Is he too much of an admirer of his guest and his work to maybe see that or ask that? Does he care? Is he starting to care about our numbers? Because we're able now to see that people, as we've mentioned already in this episode, like the episodes that we talk about psychedelics and the good audio. And I agree, it was great audio. I called you before I was done with the episode because it was so powerful.
Well, I think, gosh, there's so many interesting points in what you just said. First thing that pops in my mind is, I think I come at this podcast primarily as a psychiatrist, as a clinician, not as a researcher, not as a journalist, because I think in journalism, the journalist has a different responsibility than a clinician does. And even though I have done research, I'm not doing research now. And so I think you're right. Like if I had come at this as, this is back from the abyss, like we are a journalistic endeavor and we're really trying to go in with a skeptical mind about everything and just try to poke holes and stuff and see what's what, it would have been a different story. And I think you're right. It would have brought up one issue, and this relates to what you said, when you're under the influence of psychedelics, you can have all these powerful somatic or body experiences. And I mentioned this to you the other day. I've often wondered with my IV ketamine patients, how much of their benefit is from active placebo. What do I mean by that? So we all know what the placebo effect is, but there's a very interesting phenomenon where people in general have more benefit from active placebos. And an active placebo is something that causes side effects. So, for example, when people do a sham surgery where they just cut you open and sew you back up, that tends to be has a much bigger placebo effect than a sugar pill. A pill that causes a bad headache or bad GI upset tends to be much more effective than a sugar pill. It's because when we experience physical symptoms, we associate it, this is powerful medicine. So I've often wondered with my IV ketamine patients, the ones who have really deep, powerful, fully dissociative K-hole experiences, they'll say, I hear it all the time, these are the most powerfully therapeutic ones, which I believe is true for them. But is it powerfully therapeutic because there's something crucial about full dissociation? Is it just because the dose is high and you're getting enough ketamine to the brain? Is it because they were so crazily high, wiped out, obliterated with ketamine that they thought, okay, this is powerful stuff?
Based on that, does it matter if people are getting better? As long as it's a safe thing, is my concern about, is it more of the psychedelic or the more of the thought of psychedelics or the transference that's happening on psychedelics or with psychedelics? I'm not sure that it matters ultimately in terms of if it works and it's helping people making their lives better. Mm-hmm. I guess my concern is less about why is it happening, and more about being completely upfront, especially in a time where these medicines are not legal for the most part. Ketamine is, MDMA not, mushrooms, psilocybin not yet, at least I don't think, right? We're not there yet. And in this sort of iffy time, I think being completely transparent is important in these stories. And what that includes, I'm not 100% sure, but leaving off that potential that it is just the dose of drugs and it is maybe a placebo effect seems to be leaving out part of the story. Mm-hmm. And you're right, we're not journalists. And this is different than any story. The more I thought about this too, is that this just isn't a story. To me, it almost sounded like you guys were doing science. like this was an experiment. And I know it was training. I don't know where the line is between training and, experimenting. I don't know if results are documented. I don't know how they're quantified or if they're qualified for future use. I mean, there's a lot of this that just seemed, and maybe ultimately it comes down to the length of the podcast and that we didn't have time to do everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, gosh, again, there's so much in that. Are we doing science? I'm back from the abyss. Are we documenting science? Is Saj doing science? I think a lot of clinicians are furthering clinical knowledge and furthering science. But technically, to be doing science, you need to have a null hypothesis. You need to have a placebo group. It would be Saj giving one person ketamine lozenge and a placebo, and then doing some of these transference exercises that way. But again, ketamine is such a powerfully active material compared to a placebo. That's a difficult study to do. Much like in the MDMA PTSD studies through MAPS, they're comparing MDMA to sugar pill, which it doesn't feel anything. There were some people that said maybe what MAPS should have done is compare MDMA like with Adderall, because Adderall has a bit kind of a speedy, it's a very active.
Right. And
so then people maybe wouldn't necessarily know whether they got MDMA if they got a little Adderall, whereas, it argues the difficulty of doing placebo-controlled trials with powerful psychedelics. But I think that would be interesting. Like if we could make that last episode again, should we have gone back and said, the transference that's coming out with Natasha, is that simply a ketamine intoxication effect? Is it, as Saj argued, the sort of uncovering of primary consciousness and thus reality?
Mm-hmm. And also, I would say that because the end was glossed over, I think a little bit in my opinion, I think that there could have been very interesting conversation with you and Saj that talked about, well, is the fact that there wasn't really an attacker or perpetrator, does it matter? We thought that there was, it sure sounded like it, but do these things manifest themselves in a way that it doesn't really matter? And that is beside the point. It's a key or an insight into uncovering other things that may have been, that have shown up as a perpetrator, like the family of origin issue, the metaphor, those kind of things. The sort of mystery of all of this was not fully dissected. And so then I was sort of left with, is this a story about psychedelics, ketamine? Because it's talked about, it's in the title, and yet most of the conversation was about transference and not the effects of the psychedelic medicine that was used. It was compelling radio, and on first listen, and probably for everyone who's listening, they may or may not have these same concerns. To me, it illustrated just how difficult some of this stuff really is.
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to the point of, am I sort of not objective with Saj because he's a good friend? Am I not, am I too much of a fan of his to be objective? But I think actually, again, that brings up a really important point. It reminds me of another dear friend of mine who's also an Enneagram 8 like you, as you are.
Yes.
And my dear friend who's a therapist in Enneagram 8, he said, Craig, you don't go hard enough on your guests. He's like, you don't push people, you don't challenge them, you take what they say with kind of support and love. He said, but you're not going after people. And I said, you're right, because I'm not a journalist, and because pretty much everyone who's come on this podcast, like, I am not objective about them. Like, let's just go back to Strawberries, episode 1. Elizabeth, I've worked with her for so long. I love her. I'm not objective about her at all. In fact, when we first started this, I said, Chris, one of the things I need you to help me with is some objectivity with guests, because especially first season or 2, those were mostly my patients, and people I'm very, very close to. Like, they're like my children, or like I'm like a coach, and these are all my longtime athletes, or I don't know. There's different analogies, but and even the experts I've had on are people that in general I'm very close to and I admire deeply.
And I don't want to suggest that you should turn into some pushy journalist who's trying to make people uncomfortable at all. That certainly is not what I'm saying, because I think that part of what makes this podcast appealing to people is that you have a gentle nature and you let people speak and you don't butt in and interrupt them. So I don't want to. I don't think it should be that. I think maybe also I'm going to take some responsibility for how all this is coming across. Is that maybe I'm a little oversensitive with everything that happens in the news right now about fake news or pushing agendas or not telling the whole story. Is that I don't want us to ever fall into that category. So maybe I'm overly sensitive to what we're doing and equating it to something else in some media world. I don't know, but I couldn't help but coming away from this particular episode feeling like I was misled a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I think, given who I am and what the podcast is and who you are, I think this dynamic will continue. And again, this is one of the reasons I wanted to record this, for people to hear that, as such an advocate for my patients, as someone who just admires the work of Saj and a lot of other people who've been on the podcast, that there's a part of me that's like, yes, I want these people to come on and like spread what they have to say. And I think I agree, we have a responsibility to do everything we can to make sure that it's accurate and helpful. Because as I tell my storytellers, like, I want this to be meaningful to you. I want you to love this. But, I also want it to be, accurate and helpful. And, this podcast has turned out into a educational resource. I thought it was going to be more of like a heart resource, inspirational resource, but it's turning into an educational resource, which I think gives us more responsibility about what we say. And I guess what I would try to reassure listeners is that at my core, even though I'm very optimistic, I'm also skeptical. Like, I default towards, and I think part of that's my medical training. I mean, you definitely learn in med school and residency to be deeply skeptical of all claims until proven true.
I think that's exactly what probably affected me. Is I'm also very skeptical about things, and it's almost. I was thinking about this morning before we came in to record the episode. I was thinking it's almost as if, and it's not a perfect analogy, but I'm a skeptic of ghosts, let's say. And I'm somewhere with two experts that have been researching ghosts for a long time, and I admire their work and respect them. And I'm listening to them measure all of the things that might indicate the presence of a ghost. And everything that they said is this sort of amazed acknowledgement that there's a ghost in the room and that they're seeing all of the signs and all of and the training is pointing them to actually have some sort of proof that there's a ghost that's in the room. And me thinking, for all this time I was skeptical, but here it is. These guys are telling me, these people are telling me that what I thought was not possible is possible, and it's happening. And then the show ends, the research ends, and you find out later that, well, the reason the candle blew out was there was a window open, or there was the temperature changed in the room or something. Now this is where it fails, because that's a physical. You can still explain why there wasn't something like that in the business, your business, and in Saj's business, in the business of the mind. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of mystery that's still, a lot of things that are not understood. And sometimes maybe I forget that. And this might have been one of those times where I thought, well, these guys obviously know exactly what's happening, but in reality, you didn't really know what was happening. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say. I think Saj would agree that there's a ton of mystery and just ambiguity too. Like we know, for example, that ketamine is helping a lot of people, but exactly how Not clear. In ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, the insights that are developing, how much of those are because of the molecule itself, or because of the fact that ketamine really alters you physically, spiritually, mentally, and that people think, whoa, I'm really ready to make some change here because I'm feeling
Right.
really loaded on this.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be a little of both. It, I think it's important in my mind, when I went back and talked to Natasha, I said, so, I asked the question you asked her, was it therapeutic? And she said, it was very helpful. She said, I went to this training to learn about psychedelic somatic therapy, but in the course of doing these like 6 or 7 sessions through the week, including the one we heard, she said, I started having a lot more memories of how things were when I was little and how I would hide in the dryer from my dad because I was so scared of him, and more dreams and memories came back of my boyfriend who used to terrorize me and stalk me. And she said, and I've been able to work on those now, and I'm continuing to work on those. She said, but I think those were largely stuffed in kind of a dissociative fear. She said, I've just had this fear for so long that I haven't been able to put words to it. So it's interesting. So yeah, to me, the metaphoric ending wasn't as big a letdown as I think it was for you, because I think I see every day in this work that it's mysterious, like how it moves and how people get better. And I was actually glad to hear that no one was trying to choke Natasha.
Well, trust me, I was too. I was not rooting for there to be some horrible traumatic event in her life. No, absolutely not.
Yeah,
I do. I think that I will say this is, and we talked about this before we started recording here, is that there were aspects in the discussion, parts of the discussion that I found incredibly fascinating. Regardless of all the things that we've been talking about, I was not really, my understanding of transference was not what it is now. There were things that Saj introduced to me that I've already been able to consider and maybe apply to my own life. I love the concept of this prediction error and how healthy it can be, and what it means for somebody who is set in a negative way of thinking to have that, to be able to break out of that and make their lives better. So there are little gems in the episodes that I take and think about and come back to very often. So,
mm-hmm. And again, I love this process, Chris, because it's one of the things that makes the podcast so interesting and meaningful. So many podcasts are 27 or 28 minutes, and at minute 26, they ask 3 books, and at minute 4, they ask, where did you grow up? And they're so formulaic, and you can tell they're just dialing it in, even if they have great guests and interesting hosts. Like, so many podcasts are so formulaic, and I think we are not at all. And I think we're both trying hard with each episode and each season, like, how can we make it better, and what do we need to be doing? And so I think, listeners, I hope you can all hear this, that this actually represents, again, not just what we do with a lot of episodes, but I think the reason that it's getting better. I think season 3 is the best one yet, and I think it's because of our ability to speak really honestly and openly with each other and listen and not take it personally. When I call you and ask you about an episode and there's a long pause, and you say, well,
I'm sorry, Craig.
Do you want to hear what I think?
I'm sorry. I don't do that all of the time. I just want to be clear. I think that is the role of a producer.
I'm happy for it.
And I want to say too, just as we're sort of wrapping up here, it sounds like that I appreciate, you say you appreciate my brutal honesty, and I appreciate your optimism and your kindness, because it definitely has taken things that have been hard for me to understand or appreciate and made them accessible, and have them be part of who I'm starting to become. I love it.
Yeah, I love it too.
Living and learning.
Yeah. So this summer, I'm going to be recording a bunch more episodes. We're going to be on hiatus until the fall, but we have some really good stuff coming up. I'm going to be speaking twice in Denver this summer. July 8th at the International OCD Foundation Conference. July 8th, I'm speaking on a panel about the intersection of autistic spectrum disorder and OCD. And I'll be on that panel with one of my patients and her sister. That should be really fun. And then August 4th in Denver, I am the featured speaker for the NOAC Society, which is a psychedelic education society in Colorado. You can check their website for for time and place. I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about yet. I have some cool ideas, but check it out on NOAC this summer. And we have a lot of listeners in Denver, so anybody who listens, come and say hi. I'd love to meet you face to face. So we'll be back in a few months. Chris, thanks for all your hard work. You the man.
Likewise, you the man.
Oh, I wanna feel something. I just wanna breathe again. Dive into the deepest end. Oh, I wanna feel something. Let me get back in my body. Oh, I wanna open my hands. I know that healing is for me. I wanna breathe again. Oh, I wanna feel something. I just wanna breathe.